Well, hello there, and welcome to day 55 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, covering the 1958 classic social realist film, Look Back in Anger. It truly is a film that defines misery loves company. I didn't realise that a film such as this really existed during that time period, and that may show maybe my lack of awareness of filmmaking of that time, because it has such a bitter, nihilist, brutal heart to it that I just didn't associate with sort of that. I just have. Like a lot of people, I have that sort of fluffy image of 50s cinema, very much more the Hollywood, softer, more romanticised ideal of films, as opposed to this hard social realist play that really doesn't pull its punches. It shows the real bitter, miserable, misanthropic experience of life, and there's something very nasty about it, and that's quite refreshing, because again, I don't know how I've done this to myself this week, but this is definitely a week where I've put myself through films that are interesting and thought-provoking, and this film is definitely emotionally engaging compared to yesterday's film, where I said it made me think but didn't make me feel. But again, this is not, and I think that this might be the third or fourth time I've said this is not a fun sit. This is a very bleak film. It's a very bleak in a realist sense. It's trying to make you feel like, oh, this is reality and life, in a really dark way. So it follows Richard Burton, who plays Jimmy Porter, his wife, Alison, and their lodger, Cliff, and they just live this terrible, claustrophobic, tinderbox lifestyle where there's just this real sense of impending calamity or caged animal about it. So Jimmy is this angry. I was reading about this because this is definitely a film that I had to go away and read about and try and understand more. And Jimmy is this bitter, resentful, world-hating, nihilist character who goes off on tirades and really has this anger at everyone around him, particularly his wife, who, whereas when I talked about Miriam and Malcolm and Marie last week, I sort of questioned whether they are a representation of a dysfunctional relationship or just the too intensive experience, a concentrate of what it looks like to see people in an argument in their relationship. And though it goes to some extreme places to a degree, that's just what it looks like if you're only going to see people from the perspective of an argument. But compared to this, they are a very functional couple, because this is the definition of dysfunction. Jimmy is a mean, abusive, both verbally and bordering on, I say bordering, physically abusive man, who just wants to belittle his wife. He wants to put everyone around him down, and he just wants to sort of corrupt and create this corrosiveness in everything he does. And I think the biggest challenge of the film is really watching it going, well, why does anyone stay around this guy? Why are people still with wanting to be with him? But seemingly there's something about him that his wife wants to stay with him, and his friend and lodger wants to work with him in a sweet stall of all places. And then of course you have Helena, who comes in, and she theoretically upsets the stability, quote unquote, of their circumstances, and things begin to sort of fall apart or change. Although, frankly, she's something of a catalyst, since, like I say, this film is very much a tinderbox where something bad was going to happen sooner or later, and it was just a question of what. But yeah, like I said, Jimmy is this remarkably miserable, cruel-spirited character, and he's very much the representation of well, the way I read it was that, that he was described as the first angry young man. From the play version, that's how, the first example, theatrical example of the angry young man. But beyond that, he definitely represents that person who has no place in the world and yet resents society for being what it is. Partly because he has no place in it, because he's too educated to be working class, but he comes from a working class background, so he's clearly part of a social elevation, from a working class background, but has been educated and is well spoken, and so consequently he resents his wife, who's part of the upper middle class, and her family and people she associates with, because he resents the fact that they are the forces that oppress the poor and create the environment in which we live, and everything that, whether it's church or wealth or politics, they are the things that oppress the common man. But by that same token, he doesn't really fit in with the common man either. So again, I feel like I say this every time, but I feel the need to. This is a 63-year-old film, so I'm just going to outright spoil it. I do recommend watching it if you're interested in social realist filmmaking. In the third act of the film, so there is an Indian character, or Southeast Asian character, who's working on the stall and is essentially being pushed out because Jimmy, our lead, thinks that it is because of the forces of oppression that's this like police officer character, but in fact it turns out to be the other market stall owners who have pushed this man out. And the understanding is that it's because the reason for it is because they see him as like a competition and they just want to get rid of him. And of course, there is also a racist subtext that because he is a Southeast Asian guy, that they just want him out. And Jimmy does not understand. And it is one of the few moments of humanization for Jimmy, where he's not just going off on tirades and being cruel to the people around him. He genuinely cares about this guy and the social ramifications and the fact that Jimmy's politics are in the right place. He's just a bad guy as a person. He's just a crap person. And his realization that it's the working class man who's pushing out the foreigner. And yeah, and so there are so many ways that I've been sort of turning this character around. I mean, on one hand, I was looking at him as the representation of the middle class fear of what happens to their daughters if they marry non-middle class men. So rather than the sense of, if you marry a working class guy, you're going to end up poor and it's going to bring our family in disrepute, which is the classic, early 20th century reading. When we get to this point in which social elevation happens and you have young men who are educated to a university level but from a working class background. I interpret it as almost like the fear that this is almost like a horror film. That you know, when you show the parents of this very nice girl who essentially has been bullied and derided and just broken down and ruined by this man who has potential but really is just someone who just wants to sit there and sow discontent and make everyone miserable and not improve himself. And again, like I say, this is sort of the horror film equivalent of how people, possibly how that type of person sees this young man character. I also was looking at sort of a post-war discontent, whether maybe the Look Back in Anger title represents the idea that these young men represent the fear that the future of... that you have young men who are displaced, who are now well beyond the Second World War, but they have a resentment towards the people in power and the upper classes and the middle classes, but they don't really know what to do with themselves, and so they just become... And of course they've been educated, so they have all this knowledge, but they just sit and marinate in their own resentment and the fear that maybe this is what our future will become. And of course we're 60 years on from that, and that's, we still have that kind of character, but it doesn't represent what the world ended up becoming. But perhaps that is a way that you could interpret how the film's supposed to be presented. I did read that the playwright John Osborne wrote it based on his own experience of his unhappy marriage to actress Pamela Lane. And frankly, if he wrote the play about his own experiences, he either does not like himself or he is not a good person, because, like I say, the character of Jimmy is not a good person in most senses of the term, because he is the cause of the misery in his own homestead, and he, like I say, he is a horrible misogynist towards his wife, towards Helena, just and his thinking on women, and the fact that Alison has a child, is pregnant at the beginning of the play or film. Sorry, I'm conflating the two. And he doesn't care, when she leaves and Helena tells him, he doesn't care, and he even then starts an affair with Helena. And the idea that, he's just this angry, bitter person, and he doesn't really care who he hurts. And that makes an interesting character, it really does. It's a hard sit, but it is an interesting character study, nonetheless. Richard Burton was cast in the role. However, there was the one major criticism is the fact that he is the debate over it is that he is both too old and too reassured in himself to play it. In terms of, he was in his 30s when the character is sort of implied to be, and the actors around him are all in their mid-20s. And because he's so well-spoken and so sort of confident, he doesn't really carry the character of this angry young man in the way that he should. I like it. I think it creates this weird disparance between him and everything around him. And I do think an actor of Richard Burton's calibre would need to carry a role like this, but I can see the criticism, which is he performs these... So the character of Jimmy gives these great long tirades, great long speeches about how everything's terrible and everyone is terrible and life is meaningless. And it would take someone of Richard Burton's calibre to really carry that kind of speech. But he is the person who was it, and it's hard to compare him without seeing someone else perform that kind of role. It's funny, really. The character owns a sweet shop, and I find it quite interesting that there is another interpretation that he is, again, the ultimate... That he is what we would now refer to as a man-child, because of the way he goes off on tantrums with no trigger, and his sort of mothering relationship, and the fact that he owns a sweet stall, of all things, feels apt, and I think that's rife for interpretation in itself. As I say, it's a really interesting character study, and it's an interesting thing to see a film that depicts things like domestic abuse, the loss of a child, extramarital affairs that aren't quite as explicit as now, but they are fairly explicit. And the fact that these are covered in a film of this period, like I said, this is new to me, and I'll be interested to see more films that are of this style of this period, because, like I said, not seen anything like it before. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Take care.